one of the stories that I've heard many times is that children are amazingly resilient and really are adapting to the new reality, and whatever kind of life seems to be throwing at them, they do seem to be making the most of the opportunity to be back in childcare programs, to be back in school, even if those routines look significantly different. Having a routine really is showing itself to be quite a plus for a lot of the children that we support and work with. That being said, we are still hearing stories that, where there's an increased level of, I would say, fear of COVID itself, like a fear of of the physical virus. And the other thing I think that maybe is less obvious is just a real uncertainty because the world turned itself upside down so quickly with no notice. I think there is some uncertainty for kids about, could that happen again? And when could that happen? As there is for us, to be very honest. So I think that's kind of what we are seeing. In terms of, you used the word specific a couple of times. In terms of specific examples, I guess what we're seeing or hearing is words like safety, danger, that aren't really words that were used, certainly not used as frequently with school-age children before. And more we are hearing children say things, particularly around circumstances where kids might be out of a class for testing, and a test comes back, then you might hear a group of kids, oh, we're all safe. They've tested negative. Or children just really reluctant to even touch things that they would normally have touched that probably are considered healthy or safe to touch, but they're just so uncertain now about what is good or not good that everything's kind of off limits.
Definitely. And I think, as to Tara's point, that when we had these discussions with Andrew Fleck and gathering this feedback about what children are certainly experiencing as a result of COVID living, that theme of uncertainty and safety, was prevalent. Like in the specific examples that Tara's provided. And so it was, our job in the book to be able to think about, like, what was those underlying themes that we could really communicate to parents and children to provide a sense of normalcy, in the sense that these feelings that they have as a result of these times are normal. Because when we, as Tara pointed out, when we have massive unexpected change in our lives, of course, we don't know what's around the next bend. And this provides like an unsafe feeling or an uncomfortable feeling, because as humans, like, we're naturally inclined to like to predict what's around the next bend. And it makes us feel comfortable, and it doesn't send us, send us into a state of stress. And so, with that information that Andrew Fleck was able to provide, that was an underlying theme in the book, Project Kids Let's Be Superheroes, to really convey to children and families that these feelings are to be expected. And then to build on that about how you can navigate uncertain times. And as Tara pointed out, it is great that children are very resilient, and given some support and navigation, they can bounce back from these difficult feelings and learn how to navigate them too. It provides for a tremendous growth period, as much as, again, that these are unwanted circumstances. Sometimes in these unwanted circumstances, there can be some great opportunities to, for lessons or self-growth.
I think that the key is really to kind of open ourselves up to have conversations about those feelings and what they are, and to empathize with, the fact that this experience in particular, and I mean, this doesn't lend itself to all children's mental health scenarios, but this one is tough for everyone. So there's lots of room here for us to empathize and discuss things with children especially older school age children, about how this impacts our lives as well, you know, and to have these kinds of conversations. But I think the key is for parents and caregivers to be prepared for some, you know, bumpy road ahead in terms of emotional regulation and children's mental health. It's to be expected, and I think we should be looking for it, and you know, being aware of some of the signs and symptoms that we might be seeing.
When there's an uncomfortable feeling for a child, and to reiterate that uncomfortable feelings are a normal part of life, we can't always be happy, that it is important to walk beside them. So sometimes we don't also know the answers, and nor does Iris the dragon, and that's okay. But certainly walking beside, you know, that child or even that individual, and understanding their own experiences provides a platform to build a way forward and to problem solve and find solutions. So this feeling of unsafe during these times, again, is natural. Do we have the answers? No, as parents, as even probably as leaders of our country. But you know, as long as we're understanding how it's impacting each other and communicating about that and taking those little steps that we can, the ones that are within our control, is still helping us feel some sense of stability, since we know we have a safety net to fall back on.
The most common ways that an educator would support children in working through some of these feelings would be either intentionally through role playing, or through allowing, and not even, it happens so organically, there's very little required to even you know, just to support this or to encourage it. Children instinctively are going to act out things that are concerning them or worrying them through play. And it's really interesting to see how we've had already scenarios where little people in particular have taken on the role of the educator, and taken some of the new things like the gowns and the PPE and the thermometers. And I mean, we have one example in particular of a little girl who'd come into emergency care, and that was her game she wanted to play at night with her mother, was to take her temperature, and she had a checklist, and she wanted to ask her, have you been out of the country? And she could barely speak. So she was, you know, just working these things through, like this was new and it was different, and she was working it through. But I think that's really typical for preschoolers and how they respond. In terms of older children, it would have to be a bit more intentional. They're less likely, you know, for sure more likely to have a peer-to-peer discussion, less likely to actually have this kind of play-based, you know, working through of feelings. Books are another great prompt and a way for children to work things through that aren't maybe as vulnerable as saying, I feel such and such, because they may not even be completely aware of how they feel.
Fundamentally, there also has to be a cultural shift in just understanding that there's nothing wrong with not knowing. And I know that sounds really even more uncertain, but in reality, we actually really don't know a lot. There's very limited amount of control we have in our lives. And when we start to understand that, and what we do have control over and what we can pretend to know, then that can be somewhat freeing. To a small child, that is a very big concept. So that's probably a difficult one to relay. But as adults, if we could grasp it, it perhaps could ease some of our own anxieties, which often influence a child's behaviors and feelings, and just give them a sense of that we're comfortable during this uncertain time, so they won't feel as uncomfortable.
I really do think it's going to relate to children's individual experiences, their you know, the response, their own environment. I think what we are seeing very clearly is that this pandemic is really impacting different families in different ways. And I would say that is probably going to be more of a dividing factor in terms of how well children fare. in terms of their resilience and their mental health long term.
I don't think we do know. There's not enough studies out there to understand the impact of COVID on any particular age group. I mean, there's starting to be studies on the short-term impact for sure, in terms of stress and mental health on the rise. But those are all influenced by different factors as well. Again, as Tara reiterated, where it's biological or psychological or social influences. So it's hard to exactly know. If we do revisit, how to reduce the impact, then it kind of comes back to how can we create, a safety net from which children or adolescents to feel a sense of safety and stability during these uncertain times. So, if we are open to the concept that we don't know the long-term effect, or we don't know what is around the next corner, at least we know that we have the support and love of our community around us. And that's always there for us to access should we be having difficulty in navigating these times.
At this point in time, tools such as this one are more important than ever. For one reason being that we have parents, caregivers, educators who are also dealing with their own stresses and things that are going on with them, and may not be as apt as they would have been in another scenario where the child's mental health was at risk, but theirs wasn't necessarily. It wasn't something impacting them. This is because this has got such a global impact. The more tools we can give to parents, childcare programs, schools, to support them with asking those questions and having those conversations without them having to create these kinds of things on their own, can only be helpful. It's not just that we don't know how they're feeling, maybe we don't know how to ask. And I think what the book does is provide a lot of really good prompts, particularly in the discussion section, that help to ask those questions in ways that are likely to elicit responses that are going to be helpful, and rather than maybe an incorrect question, not that there necessarily is one, but sometimes if we approach things in a way that really is helpful, and I think in the book using the characters and those kinds of things to relate to really might help for children to let their guard down and have those real conversations with whoever it is they're enjoying the book with.
That's the intention of the Iris the Dragon books, is to create a bridge for parents and caregivers or community helpers to help children access what they may be feeling and to validate their experiences, but really to provide a platform for the parent or the adult basically and the child to start that discussion around their experiences, so that again it could be, so when there's knowledge about what that particular child is experiencing, then you can again build on that and leverage that experience to find a way forward. It's when we don't know what our children are thinking and feeling that it becomes a problem, and then we can't help them when it gets too far along.
One way that I can think of that peers certainly can help peers, and we know that with especially school-age children, these peer relationships are huge in terms of the impact that they have on their mental health, is really it's really about that shared experience again, and maybe some shared problem solving. And I think that an adult guiding some of that certainly is going to be supportive, both to the child and to the adult, I would imagine, because once you start with solution focused thinking and you're really focusing on, okay, this is the situation that we're dealing with. We're all in this together to some extent, especially in a shared experience like a return to school. What can we do about that? It's not exactly the way we might like it to be, but what kinds of things can we control? What kinds of things can we do together to make this situation better for all of us?
They don't have to sit by and wait for someone to rescue them, and they too can be active in their own journey through the pandemic. And kids like to have roles, particularly young ones. They love having a job to do. So, giving them something that they can be responsible for is very empowering for them, and important for a child's development to know that they do have a place in this world. That's part of identity formation. So certainly just allowing kids to understand, again, as Tara said, like, age appropriate things that they can do, and what's in their control, and how they can be active contributors to the fight against COVID is a great thing to encourage in younger children.